on your chairs are cards to fill out for questions, and you can hand those in over here on the blue bags where questions go, and we'll also go through the audience to collect those from you. I also would like to point out that we have translators over here, so if anyone needs that, we have that available. And I just want to thank everyone for volunteering their time today and coming out. If you have any questions or need anything, there's also materials outside at the end of their forum with regards to all of our candidates, and you can certainly speak with them individually after the event. I think that's it, and I would like to say thank you and carry on.
Hello, welcome to the forum. I'd like to welcome our candidates. Starting from the left, we have Christopher Boyd, we have Kathy Jordan, Stacy Ashland, Shauna Tharop, Ken Dalberg, and Alex Scharf. I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and I'd like to thank the PTA for hosting this debate. Candidates were picked randomly. Opening statements will go left to right, and we'll be alternating the order in which the candidates are going to be answering the questions. Closing statements will go from right to left. We have our question collectors over here, our translators in the back. Sorters will filter out similar questions and hand questions to me. And the event is being recorded, and no other recordings are permitted without permission. The candidates will have 1.5 minutes for opening statements. There are no advanced questions for this forum, with 1 minute response per question and closing statements after that. We plan to be done by 5:45 so that candidates can mingle with the audience depending on the volume of questions. As audience etiquette, please do not applaud, and campaign materials are not allowed in this room, and we will be filming the event. No other filming is permitted. And after the event, there will be candidate tables outside. So first, we are going to be doing opening statements. We're starting here with Mr. Boyd. Mr. Boyd, 90 seconds.
Hello. Thank you so much for coming. I'm particularly excited about the topic that we have for this debate, which is, of course, the high schools and especially secondary schools. But I think we're blessed in Palo Alto to have two very unique high schools. But the challenges that I would put out there is that we really need to focus on how we can attain increased levels of educational attainment, how we can attain widespread equity in terms of learning outcomes and performance of students, and how we can measure our student learning in terms of international standards. It's not good enough to be best in California. Today, we live in a world economy, and we need to really compete in a world economy and reach out to the best to learn. But finally, we need to understand what efficiencies are necessary in human resources, in teaching, and other resources that we need to give to the schools. And I'll just give you a starting point. 30%.
Ms. Jordan, 90 seconds for you.
Thank you. Thanks to PTA for hosting, for all of you for being here, giving up some of your afternoon. Like so many of us here, I came from somewhere else, Philadelphia, and I came out here to play tennis at Stanford and also to get an education. We chose to live in Palo Alto because of the excellent public schools. And as befitting a school board candidate, I do have children, and I actually do have children in the district. I have one who graduated, and I have one still in middle school in the district. So I have a stake in making this district the best that it can be. And while we do have a great school district, and a lot to be proud of, not surprisingly, it does have some issues. And to fix those issues, first, I think we need to acknowledge them. And we need our school board to actually exercise oversight to prevent problems from happening in the future. For example, we need to manage our tax dollars responsibly, rather than a $6 million blunder here and a $5 million error there. We need to make sure our students receive their instructional minutes, instead of allowing a high school schedule that would have been 21 days short of instruction. We need to ensure all of our children meet the A through G requirements upon graduation. Yet instead, over 30% of our students do not. Our children are standing in the Poly football field instead of sitting in the classroom because of vaping in the bathroom setting off the fire alarms. And that's according to the Poly Voice and to the Poly principal in a recent article. These are not past problems, but ones that continue today. In short, we desperately need our school board to provide some oversight.
Ms. Ashland?
Hi, I'm Is it on?
Might want to push that.
Now it's on. I'm Stacy Ashland. 26 years ago, I completed my master's degree in computer science, the highest degree anyone in my family had ever achieved. And I moved here to Palo Alto for my career. I have 2 children. My eldest went all the way through Palo Alto Unified School District, starting in pre-K and graduating from Gunn. That is with my student with special needs who had a 75% chance of not graduating, meeting the A through G requirements. My youngest is currently a junior at Gunn High School. In these past 18 years, I have extensive on-the-ground experience working with students, for students, with parents, and working collaboratively with teachers, administration, as well as board members. I've been elected to and served on the site council at both elementary and high school. The site council is a government body preceding the school board level that oversees funding according to our goals at individual school levels. I've served on PTA council and PI advisory board, as well as PTA and as PI rep at all 3 school levels. And I established the special ed connection with the PTA council. I've been appointed and served on Parks and Recreation Commission and served at the city level for 4 years, working on school-related issues, including pedestrian access for safe access to schools. I am running on a platform of student success, teacher support, and community connectedness for all students, parents, and our community as a whole.
Mr. Dobb?
The first time I talked in front of a crowd was actually right here in my drama class in 8th grade. So I've come full circle. Now I do it every day. I'm an attorney, I'm a litigator. I fight for rights, labor rights, consumer rights, public rights. I fight for families. And I've been advocating for student welfare in this district since I graduated from Gunn in 2008 at the very beginning of the student suicides, and have been doing so throughout my life since then. And my wife and I moved back here after law school because we have plans to raise our future kids in this district. Because we both went to schools here and we know how great of a community and education PAUSD offers. I have the most experience out of anyone here in governance, and I think that's important because right now what our district sorely needs is the ability to turn our really good ideas into realities. You know, advocacy is great, and our board has really strong advocates. But what we need is somebody who has experience turning advocacy into concrete solutions. And that's something that I've been doing for a long time. I've worked in government at the county level, the state level, and the federal level. And so I understand the kinds of processes you need to have in place to make sure you actually implement on ideas. The bottom line is that everything I've done with my life, the person who I am really, is because of PAUSD. It's because of the foundation that was laid here. And so my commitment to the district is deeply, deeply personal.
Mr. Dauber?
Good afternoon, I'm Ken Dauber. I'm the incumbent president of the school board. And a classic question for someone seeking re-election is, are we better off than we were 4 years ago? And the answer is absolutely yes, even though there's still a lot of work to be done. That's why both of our local papers have endorsed my re-election and said that the district is in the best place that it has been in the last 10 years, and said that I have been a force for positive change in that process. I ran 4 years ago on some key promises. I promised to work to improve the well-being of our students after the tragic suicides at Gunn. We've improved mental health services and built wellness centers. We're implementing an advisory program at Gunn and social emotional learning across the district. Students are better off. I promised to improve special education, and we're building a cooperative rather than conflictual relationship with families. The school board is funding a special education plan, put $1.5 million into that this year with more coming. That means better services for our students. I promised a better run school district. I didn't win every battle. I lost a fight over a contract that cost the district dollars, but I've made the tough choices to put in new leadership that I think is among the best in the state. That means better decisions and better outcomes for students. So I'm really looking forward to having this discussion this afternoon, and I hope that after you hear from all of us that I earn your support in November. Thank you.
Mr. Boyd or Mr. Sharfy?
School can cause stress and anxiety and has done so for me. From my experience, the further along in school you are, from elementary to middle school to high school and college, the worse it got. I think one of the biggest issues in secondary schools that is absent in primary schools is stress. Why is stress so prevalent? My insight is people are building the value of themselves, and it is based on others' opinions of them. Others will judge you for failing a test, not doing well in class, and not being above average and getting excellent grades. This can affect many things related to school as well. It's not just grades, it could be fashion. You could be stressed out if you're different and based on how you dress. Even more serious is a lower self-worth based on others' opinion because of mental disabilities. This is a serious problem I had to overcome myself, which has helped me look at other things people judge you on and having to overcome self-worth based what others think of you. I think the majority of, if not almost all students, face this issue to at least some degree. Social emotional learning gives people the tools for introspection and deeper thoughts to find these problems, look at the issues, and figure out the solution for themselves. It can reduce stress and increase self-worth. I think this is a major issue for the secondary schools, which this debate is about, and I'm running for the board because I've been there, I know what it's like, and I'm there for you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your opening statements. This first question is, students at risk of not graduating with A to G requirements have found the most success in programs out of the district, including Foothill College, Middle College, FCE, and Dreamcatchers. How will you, as a board member, support delivery of these basic academic services to students? What is your experience in developing alternate programming for students at risk? We're starting with Ms. Jordan for this question. 60 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a very important question. Noting the statistics about graduation rates for A through G, I was shocked to see some of these statistics at an LCAT meeting, that only 24.6% of our students with disabilities graduate with meeting A through G requirements, only 48% of our African Americans, and only 49% of our Latinos. And in fact, overall, Palo Unified, only 67% of our students graduate meeting the A through G requirements so that they can apply to a CSU or a UC. So I think we can do better than that. I'm glad that there are other programs such as attending middle college, but in terms of our secondary schools, middle and high school, really we also need to be looking at our proficiency scores in elementary schools, because our proficiency scores in the elementary schools predict whether or not our students will actually meet the A through G requirements in high school. So in fact, we need to look at early identification, and early intervention. Thank you.
Ms. Ashland?
We currently allocate space for 15 students for each of our high schools to apply and attend Middle College and Foothill College, and there is always more demand than that. There is a wait list every year, which indicates that we're not meeting the needs of a large percentage of our students at our two high schools. Some of the reasons I hear for why this is the case is that some students want higher advanced classes in the humanities that we don't currently offer. We have advanced placement in the STEM classes, AP Physics, AP Bio, but we need them in English as well as in history. Additionally, I believe we need to support our AVID program on par with our neighboring districts in Menlo Park and Mountain View Los Altos high school districts, where they have a higher rate of students of underrepresented minorities on college track and proceeding on to college upon graduation.
Mr. Dar?
The first thing we need to do to address the issue of equity is look at the data and make sure that we are examining data at the site level to identify gaps so that we can target our resources to make sure that the students who are most underserved are getting the resources that they need. Transitional kindergarten is something I'd like to see rolled out at all the elementary schools, public transitional kindergarten, because bridging that gap before it even starts, before kindergarten, is really the key to making sure that later on students have the same access to opportunity within the district.
And finally, it's important for us to build stronger relationships with our community colleges. I mean, right now, to access information about the middle college program, you have to go to the Mountain View School District website to access it easiest. And that's problematic because it means a lot of students aren't getting the information they need to give themselves the broadest opportunities to succeed.
Mr. Dauber?
6 years ago, I was among a group of people who advocated for the change to A to G graduation requirements because many of our underrepresented and low-income students were not graduating ready to go to a public college or university. And we have now finally rolled out that requirement. I have been pressing to understand what the gap is still between where we are in terms of requirements and where we need to be. It could be that some students are receiving Ds, so they're not qualified for A to G. Could be that some students are receiving waivers. So I'm really pressing to understand what the data is. It could also be unconscious bias, or one of the reasons that it took so long for us to roll this out, for the district to roll this out, is because there was real resistance among some teachers and some subjects to providing the courses needed for A to G to all students. So I am very interested in pursuing this question and pursuing it on the school board.
Mr. Scharf?
I think providing support to students who are in programs outside the school is important, but I think starting with the programs that the school offers is more important. How, from my experience, I wasn't able to get into Ohlone in kindergarten because there wasn't enough space. And I only got in first grade when there was space freed up. And I wasn't able to get into Connections here. And again, a big need of students is this type of support, and the district does not provide enough spots for the people who need it. And so I think looking at the programs in the district that need support and more slots for people before looking at outside programs is very important.
Mr. Boyd?
This problem has been described very eloquently. But I think we're still underestimating it. We're at a time in which the curriculum itself must change and must face drastic change. Our approach for measuring learning must change if we're going to keep up with the tremendous load of learning that has occurred within the last 15 years. If we look back 20, 30 years, the subjects by comparison to what a freshman would need entering any college are substantially different. So we need to think very clearly how we're going to tackle this problem. It's not just resources, it's also realigning the curriculum to teach more efficiently and reduce our evaluation based upon quantitative testing of students.
Thank you. The next question is, how can we get more math and science enrichment for students who have already mastered the standards in elementary school? We're starting with Ms. Ashland for this question.
How can we get more math and science enrichment at the elementary level after students have mastered those at grade level? That's our job as a public district, to provide all students with the opportunity to achieve grade level and to go beyond at their own pace. I believe our elementary schools have and still continue to, this is a secondary forum, but we can talk elementary, provide extra work when students want to go beyond what is already provided. So we should continue to do that because students do develop at their own pace, and a lot of our students are getting additional education opportunities in the home and in the community already before they start our schools. So we would continue to do that.
Mr. Darrell?
I'm going to assume that the question is geared towards how do we address this issue at the high school level if they've already mastered it early on, because this is the high school forum. So I'll say a couple of ways. The first is really broadening opportunities for applying that knowledge to real life situations, really getting into the depth of the knowledge once you've mastered the breadth. And there are great programs like that at our high schools. There's one called Greene that focuses specifically on real-life application for math. Those are the types of programs that really engage students in the process of learning and provide additional challenges outside the standard A through G curriculum. The second thing is, as we just talked about, building those relationships with community colleges. Because if students are requiring a challenge that they're not getting from the high school environment, then that's an opportunity for students to get an even more challenging environment while still going through our high school. So building relationships with community colleges and really focusing on expanding our innovative programs that focus on real-life application.
Mr. Dauber.
We need to take a close look at our 6th and 7th grade math in particular. It hasn't been revisited in 15 years or so, and I think there's a lot of interest in the community in meeting the needs of students at all different levels in terms of math. So there's an effort underway to do that. I met with parents over the summer and directed them to the superintendent. I know that our current superintendent is also really engaged in this. I think we have two goals. We want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of students wherever they are, and we also want to make sure that decisions that get made in 6th and 7th grade don't limit opportunities in high school. So that we need to make sure that we're doing both of those things, that we have opportunities in 6th and 7th grade, but that we're not closing doors for students when they get into high school.
Mr. Scharf.
I agree with Shonik's points that I think working with community colleges is very important, and also more field work, that having them take their theoretical knowledge and apply it in practical use is very important to understanding the material better. But one of my things that I think is really important is a program to help students bridge the lanes, and that if they're ahead, even if they're ahead at their own lane, it's very hard to jump to the next lane up. And so programs to help them transition to a higher lane is very important, whether that is transitioning to a year ahead or farther than that. That can still be done within the lanes and transitioning through them, and then after that working with community colleges towards the end of high school.
Mr. Boyd.
This is an incredible question because if we look at international standards, we're not really teaching math and science. That's shocking. Let's look at Finland. Now, in Finland, a student will have a 4-hour school day, yet they rank way above our own country's school standards. How are they achieving that? And if you look at their elementary school curriculum, they're teaching chemistry, they're teaching physics, they're teaching math. What we're calling 6th and 7th grade math is taught in elementary school. And we need to talk further about how to really achieve this in the upcoming next 4 years, because it is a critical gap. We can look at Finland, they're way ahead of us. We can look at Korea and China, and they're also ahead of us in math. They would feel we don't have a curriculum. The difference is they're studying 16 hours a day. So we can improve.
Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. The question was about elementary school, but I think it applies to the secondary school level as well, in that we need to meet our students where they are. And that is a great challenge because we do have wide ranges, whether it's elementary school or in the secondary schools. And we need to meet our children, our students where they are, and give them meet them with the level and the pace that they need, and match them, and differentiate in the classroom to be able to meet that. Provide challenges for all of our students. We also need to make sure that the processes that are in place, particularly in math, for example, that have been raised, are transparent and fair, and based on national standards and tests, so that they may meet those levels. We need to make sure that we're not placing barriers in the way of those who are excelling, and we also need to make sure we have supportive mechanisms for those who want to bridge levels and lanes as well. Thank you.
The next question is, do you support limits to campaign spending for school board? Why or why not? We're starting with Mr. Darb for this question.
Absolutely. I support campaign spending limits at all levels of government, but especially for school board, because it turns out that the major barrier to access, political access, is money. And that means it's very hard for non-traditional candidates to run for office in Palo Alto, to run for school board. And that means statistically, minority and historically underrepresented minority candidates, low-income candidates, professional, working professionals, because obviously money requires you spending a lot of time reaching out and asking for money. And so campaign limits are really critical, because the campaign should really be about the substance, not about how many lawn signs somebody can put up on the median and on Alma, or how many mailers can be sent out to all the people in Palo Alto. It should be about the issues. And the way to make it about the issues is to have campaign spending limits. And I think that that would be a really good thing for this community.
Mr. Dauber.
I agree with Shauna.
I agree with a lot of what was said, but another thing I think that is also kind of connected to campaign spending limits is the voter guide that has the candidate statements, and how currently the district covers half the cost, but that's still $1,600 that you have to pay to get a ballot statement. And I know one of the candidates here didn't have that money, and so you can only learn about 5 people out of the 6 in the voter guide. And I think, like when I went to the Register of Voters, there's other counties and districts that have a flat fee of $50 or $100, and everything after that is covered by the district. And so I think that's another point that can be addressed for campaign spending to help equalize the playing field for minorities.
Campaign spending is one way to look at it, but we've got to look at it also from the changes in technology. I've proposed to our dear PTA, which has done such a wonderful job, PTA, in promoting this kind of debate and discussion, that they actually put up a platform that would allow us all as candidates to put up statements, put all these videos online, and then direct the information to the members of the community. And I think that would help us tremendously. The other thing is the media is so incredibly biased today. It is a frightening prospect when you have a president endorsing body slammer of reporters and the media just making things up about candidates that are not true, with no basis, and putting them out as a fact.
Thank you. Yes, of course I'd be supportive of making sure we provide access for all candidates to compete in these races. As Alex mentioned, Palo Unified already subsidizes half the cost. He was referring to the candidate statement in the county voters guide. So it's interesting, this process. Palo Unified subsidizes half that cost, but many other school districts do not. So interestingly enough, something like, I think it was Fremont Union, it was over $5,000 for a school board candidate to put their candidate statement in that guide. And of course that may, place barriers in terms of certain segments of the community from going forward and being able to compete even-handedly with other candidates. So I certainly would want to see us encourage all different segments of our community to be able to participate. Thank you.
I'm not going to talk about dark money at the federal level. Absolutely, campaign spending limits are the right idea. There's additional nuance to that as well, whether the campaign contributions are coming from within the district, from outside of the district, and some are actually self-funded, a fair amount are self-funded. And traditionally, money does determine who is likely to win a race. In Palo Alto, not necessarily the case. We have seen that the highest spender has not necessarily come out as a winner of the race. In Palo Alto, we have an educated community, and our community finds that actions speak louder than ads and lawn signs. So in this race, I'm not worried about it going forward. It absolutely is something we should pursue.
The next question is, what is the main responsibility of the school board in your mind? Mr. Dauber, this question starts with you.
The school board has 2 major responsibilities. One is setting policy for the school district, which includes setting the district's budget. I've been very involved in increasing the school board's involvement in setting the budget, which in the past had been pretty marginal, frankly. So now we have a series of study sessions. We really are going deep into understanding whether we're allocating resources appropriately. And the second is oversight. So making sure that the district leadership is correctly managing the district and effectively managing the district, and when it's not, taking action. So for example, when the district management failed to notify the teachers union of the board's desire to renegotiate the last year of a contract, I responded to that failure by calling for Superintendent McGee to step down, because I thought that was a serious management failure, which he did a week after that.
I agree with a lot of what Ken said. I think another thing as well is that we need to, as a board, make sure that everything is working fluidly between the different schools along the district, and that we need to encourage the sharing of good ideas to other schools that don't necessarily have these, and that I think guiding is very important in this type of situation where we want the best schools and we want all of our schools to have the features that are the best for the students.
Thanks for another great question. A question about what the board should really be, I think, is essential. I think the board, above all, has a moral and fiduciary duty to be responsible to the parents, students, or teachers. Other words like compliance, other words like enforcing standards are pretty meaningless. I mean, we need to realize that we have to be out of our board chairs and have a fiduciary duty to be out talking and protecting to people, and we must have a vision, and that vision comes from a collective conversation from parents, teachers, students, to make a successful outcome for this school, and that's not happening at this particular instance, and we must draw together the teachers, we must draw together the management supervisors that they have, like, shall we say, principals, assistant principals, and the rest of the community.
Thank you. The board, in my view, has some set responsibilities: hire and supervise the superintendent, set goals and priorities for the district, and obviously help in managing those things. The board, we are elected, we would be elected officials, so we need to be responsive to our community, to our constituents, all of you, and especially since our children are in these schools. I take that responsibility very seriously in terms of the oversight. I think that is the main responsibility that the board should be providing. Some examples of that, which we heard mentioned, is fiscal management of our tax dollars, making sure that our students come first. For example, shortchanging our students of instructional time is not something that that we would hope some oversight would be exercised upon. Also, not following laws in response to sexual assault incidents in regards to our students. Again, we would hope to see an example of our school board exercising oversight in examples like those. Thank you.
Yes, it is the responsibility of our board to set policy and to set the budget, and it's also to follow the policies that we have in place. We have board policies that have been in place for 40 years, including the 2-meeting rule, which not only gives the community a chance to hear and speak to an issue, but also gives the 5 board members a chance, the only chance, to discuss the issue and the pros and cons and convince one another without violating the Brown Act. So yes, set policy, yes, set budget, follow the policies that we have in place, and the amount of 80% turnover at the administrative level that we've had in the past year is not stable or sustainable in this district. We need to hire and support and train the people that we hire in our district, as opposed to turning them over again and again when they do not fulfill their responsibilities. That's on the board.
So the board has 4 distinct roles. The first is vision and oversight, setting the future for our district. The second is the representative and trustee function, being responsive to the community's needs and really making sure that we are acting in the best interests of the students. Then we have the fiduciary role, which means that we got to make sure your money is going to the students who need it, the programs that are serving those students. And finally, the instrumental role. And this means that when there's state law about what kind of education we need to have for certain areas, it's our role to carry that out. And so, a whole bunch of roles, and so the board's overarching job is to balance all those, to make sure that the board is providing proper oversight to the district's implementation of that vision, to make sure that we have processes in place to actually act out the board's vision, and to make sure that we are being transparent with the community so that we can hear and really listen to what the community is saying.
Thank you. The next question is, do you agree with the vote as taken by the board to add weighted GPAs to transcripts? If not, do you plan to advocate for a repeal? Or if yes, how will you measure that its effect on students is more positive than negative? We're starting with Mr. Scharf with this question.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that again?
Okay. Do you agree with the vote as taken by the board to add weighted GPAs to the transcripts? If not, do you plan to advocate for a repeal? Or if yes, how will you measure that its effect on students is more positive than negative?
I think this is a really interesting subject. There's lots of people that are on both sides, and I think that it has some benefits and some detriments. And I think we can look at other schools that we are trying to be similar to and competitive with, like Monte Vista, which does not have a weighted GPA, even though they are a highly competitive school with us and very advanced. And so I think that we can look at why they don't have it and see whether that outweighs why we put it in place. And so I think right now I'm undecided whether I support it or not. I think you need a lot more research, and I've only done a brief overview on it, but I would not get rid of it currently.
I think weighted GPAs bring an element of reality. Some courses, and I'll take the case of dance, may require 15 hours of practice a week, and that should be reflected in the amount of credit that that student gets in following her passion or his passion. At the same time, other classes don't require that huge investment of time and energy. So there has to be some way to be fair to all different talents in the class. It's not that math is going to be weighted heavily or science is going to be weighted heavily. Each course can be weighted heavily if there is a commitment of a certain amount of time and energy to be successful in getting the grade in the course.
Thank you. I support weighted GPA. I believe that the weighted GPA is simply one indicator of a person's or a student's record. It's not reflective of the worth of any person, good or bad. It's simply someone's record, which can be changed over time. Students do want to challenge themselves, whether it's taking honors or AP courses, and we cannot ignore the college admissions process, which does place weight on the rigor of a student's curriculum. And so that is also reflected in their record, whether or not a weighted GPA is applied. And one of the goals of Policy Unified has also been for the historically underrepresented students to take more honors and AP courses. And so I think that weighted GPA is just simply in line with that and reflects a student's record. Thank you.
This is one of those issues that sounds simpler on the surface than it actually is. I do agree that the board made the right decision in that both high schools are now reporting weighted GPAs. That is the right decision to make our high schools on an equal playing field in our district. But the two sides of this issue is we want to reduce student stress and anxiety and depression, and that is harder to measure than academic achievement. We are making progress in that way, and we need to continue pursuing what we've started with Project Safety Net and developmental assets. chopping off the top doesn't necessarily help the students that struggle at the bottom. So by reducing our lanes of math at Gunn High School from 4 to 3, we've doubled the failure rate in math. So let's not do that. Let's focus allocate our resources to help those students that are below grade level and not penalize those that are high achievers, because it just doesn't work. It harms both groups.
In a vacuum, there are certain policies like weighted GPA which have the potential to have as many downsides as they have upsides. Increasing student stress, potentially disadvantaging students who are already disadvantaged. And that's why previously, last year, I spoke out against weighted GPA. But if I get elected, I'm not going to advocate for a repeal because the community has spoken on that issue. So instead, I'm all about moving forward. What can we do in this district to make sure that we are providing that support system for students so that weighted GPA isn't adversely affecting them? And I will say that I think weighted GPA actually doesn't go far enough to building students to be successful in our world. And so we need to really focus on the other things that matter, which are focusing on building whole students who are passionate about learning, lifelong learning. I'll just end really quickly. There's a lawsuit against the Harvard for admissions that a lot of testimonies just come out recently, and I was reading some of it this morning, and the Harvard admissions counselor said on the stand that at Harvard, we don't need more scientists, we need more humanists. And that means that we need to be focusing on all types of learning in our district.
While I support the board's decision, I voted for it. It was unanimous to adopt the superintendent's recommendation on weighted GPAs. I think there's a couple of myths around weighted GPAs, though. Both high schools have long had weighted GPAs. The University of California system has weighted GPAs probably for decades. Both high schools have long been reporting those weighted GPAs to colleges. So the change was to make that reporting happen on the transcript and to make the method equivalent between the two high schools, both of which I think make a lot of sense. But this is not by any means the most important issue that the board has dealt with over the last few years in terms of student education and what's really going on in the lives of students. So I think it's worth investigating whether or not it's made a difference to students. I suspect that it hasn't, because not a whole lot has changed. And then we'll look at adjustments if it seems appropriate.
Thank you. This one is on a similar topic. What is your opinion on laning? Would you delane math in middle schools, and would you delane math in high schools? How would you ensure all students receive appropriate challenges and support? When is laning helpful, and when does laning do harm? We're starting with Mr. Boyd on this question. Sure. What is your opinion on laning? Would you delane math in middle schools, and would you delane math in high schools? How would you ensure all students receive appropriate challenges and support? When is laning helpful, and when does laning do harm? Mr. Boyd.
This is another great question. I'm so glad I came to the debate just to talk about all these topics. But I think I differ. I differ because, again, looking top down, if you see what we're doing in math with lanes, without lanes, it doesn't keep up to Finland. Finland doesn't even start teaching their own native language till a child is 7 or 8. Same thing for math. The Finnish children way outperform our existing math scores. And we need to talk about how that happens and what can be done to fix it. Laning is not a solution. But what is a solution is to support all students from the bottom up. You have challenging courses, that's important, of different weights, some more complex than the other. But what has been proven in research is that if you have about a 2-hour session, you can uplift all students, even in Harlem, even in districts that are way behind us, and this is what we need to do.
Thank you. Simply put, I favor laning. Laning or differentiation is happening as early as first grade with reading groups that are differentiated. In third grade at Duveneck, we had differentiation in math. And that pilot project was put into place for the benefit of the lower level math students and served both sets of students. So it's just a matter of trying to meet students where they are so that they can proceed at the level and pace that works for them. So at the same time, of course, I would support very strong mechanisms to allow students to be able to move between lanes. Of course, as Alex has mentioned, we need to make sure that those opportunities are available. So I would not favor delaning math in middle school or delaning math in high school. Thank you.
I agree that I wouldn't delane in middle or at high school level. The question of when does it help and when does it harm a student, it's helpful because it keeps students moving forward when sometimes students are not confident in their skills or they just might not want to try that hard. Sometimes the fact that they're moved up to the next lane pushes them just enough so that they are motivated to work at that next level. When it harms the students is when the pace is too fast or too slow. And again, what we need is individualization, differentiation that is appropriate for the child's level of skill. Because when we got rid of that lowest lane and the failure rate doubled, we didn't provide the scaffolding necessary for the students. So instead of just throwing them into a higher pace, we need to do that with the scaffolding. And all children are capable of making progress at these levels if we dedicate our resources to looking at who's struggling and why.
I think in the conversations around laning, at least today, a lot of it has to do with personal experience with laning. I think it's really important to have a data-driven approach for pedagogical issues. I mean, listening to the experts who we hire in the district, but also making sure that we're collecting data to see, well, how exactly does laning or delaning affect our students? What groups of students are most being served and who are being underserved? So that's step one, to actually give you an informed answer. What I will say is we do need to do more to bridge lanes because students who are already in lower lanes have a very difficult time in bridging those lanes to more advanced courses. And that's a problem because if you look at higher lane courses and you say, okay, well, most of these students have tutors. Well, now we've artificially raised the floor so that students who don't have access to tutors just aren't able to hang in those classes. And that means that as a district, we need to do more to actually provide those kinds of resources to those students to enable them to bridge that lane and have the same educational opportunities as the rest of the students.
So like a lot of topics, laning is a pedagogical question that I leave entirely to teachers. I do think that there has been, on this topic, a lot more heat than light. I think that the idea that somehow the question of whether we're going to have laning in middle and high schools is on the table, that anybody has actually ever proposed that staff wants to do it, that the school board wants to do it, that's just false. I read a statement on the invitation, I think, to a candidate coffee saying that the school board is one vote away from eliminating laning. That's silly, inaccurate, and I think it's really about fear-mongering rather than about reflecting what's actually going on. The real conversation is around, as you're hearing up here, what supports do we provide for students to move across lanes? Do the lanes that we have adequately support students? The question of whether or not we're going to have laning or not is just a question that is not on the table.
I think the main issue here for me is usually providing the simplest solution is going to be best. And staying with laning and looking, we've all kind of said the same problem that laning has and what the solution is, which is a bridge program. But completely redoing the system is going to be much harder and more complex than just upgrading the current system. And so I think keeping laning and adding this support is by far the best solution to this problem. As for the failings of laning and being in too high a lane or too low a lane, I think for these bridge programs, it can be kind of obvious for teachers whether someone is zoning out in class and not paying attention and unfocused because they're bored or if they're struggling. And so I think the teachers have a role to identify the students in their class, kind of like what we've talked about previously in elementary schools of identifying students with special needs.
The next question is, what are 2 things that you think the school board is doing great and will continue doing if you're elected? And what are 2 things that you think you will change if you are elected? This question goes to Ms. Jordan first.
Okay, thank you. Two things that I would change if I were elected. One of the things that comes to mind, again, is a very unfortunate statistic, is the 24.6% of our students with disabilities are meeting the A through G requirements upon graduation. It means 75% of our students with disabilities are not meeting the A through G requirements. So I think that that special education program needs examination and needs support and possibly needs attention. I also think that another thing that I would look to change as a member of the school board is the compliance that our school district is undergoing. And our school district has a history of not adhering to the law, so I think that is something that greatly needs attention. I think that two things that I would keep on our school board is I think that we have dedicated and decent people on the school board who are community members. And, okay, thank you.
One of the things that's top of mind about what's really great about a district like Palo Alto is that we have such an informed, involved parent community that not only, I mean, the PTAs and what PI does in this district is substantial, and that is a huge advantage that we have in our community. And I would absolutely continue working closely with the parents and the community for that very reason. The other huge stride that I've seen in the past 10-ish years is the focus on inclusion and mental health. The two things I would change, though, are humanities, advanced classes in the humanities, foreign language at the elementary level, and down the road, looking at a shared use of Coverly as a third school, potentially from grade 6, from either middle or high, or a combination of both.
Two of the things that the district has been doing well with is social emotional learning curriculum, really focusing on student welfare. That's been an issue in the district for a long time, and I'm glad to see concrete steps being taken to address the issue. The second is compliance. We have had problems with compliance in the past, but the district is on a really strong path forwards. By choosing to hire a general counsel and making the decision to be proactive about compliance, the district is doing much better in that regard, and I'm very optimistic for the future. Two areas I'd like to see change are sort of really high level, but the budget process. Making sure that we have a process in place for distinguishing when to use reserve funds versus operational funds to make sure that we're not entering into a $2 to $3 million budget deficit, and making sure we're spending our money wisely. And the second is communication with city council. I mean, these are the two governing boards of your town, right? And it's really important that when there are issues that overlap between city council and school board, there is strong leadership from the board, but also a collaborative process in place to make sure that we as a city are addressing those needs.
I do think that compliance is a real strong point in the district, and I'm puzzled actually when I hear the opposite, because it makes me wonder whether people are actually paying attention to what has happened. Over the last 2 years, we have had a full transparent investigation of compliance issues. We've settled a relationship with the Office for Civil Rights. We've hired a Title IX compliance officer, an investigator. We've logged numerous and investigated numerous complaints. We're now praised by the former head of the Office for Civil Rights as a model for compliance as a K-12 district. So the narrative that somehow we are deficient in compliance is just a false narrative. And what I'd like to hear from candidates who think otherwise is what concrete changes they would make beyond the ones that we've already done. I think areas of improvement, I think homework, the implementation of the district's homework policy is definitely something that I'm going to focus on in the second term if I'm reelected, and also really closing the achievement gap, because that is an area where I'm not satisfied with the progress that we've made.
I think two things that the district does really well, kind of like what Shonik said. I think the step in the direction of social emotional learning is very important, and I really am glad that the school district has done that, and I might want to look at expanding it if necessary. I think that would be something I'm very interested in, and I think we do a good job with incorporating tech into the schools. That we're in Silicon Valley, we have all the tech in the world here, and we are very good at taking that and putting it into the classrooms. And some of the things that I think should need work are teacher incentives, that we need to grant them sabbaticals and grants based on their exemplary work to encourage great behavior and great achievements from the teachers, and to focus on training for the teachers, that we need to have better training and more effective training for the teachers on social emotional learning for themselves and how to deal with different situations in the school.
I'm really challenged to try to find good points with the current board. And the last 4 years have been an exercise in blaming a lot of people for all the problems that are the board's responsibility. I mean, if you're a champion athlete of any kind, you can never be good until you can predict where the ball is going to be and be there to make the winning goal. And the board has missed all of these calls, and it is tragic. If I get to the board, I think what I will change is the concept that somehow you can be successful running a school of this size. $1 million every 4 years is spent on this school by sitting in a chair and saying A or nay. I will be out in the field, talking to everybody, working with everybody to change things until we beat Finland and China and Shanghai.
Thank you. The next question is, soliciting and giving ample opportunity for community feedback has been an important hallmark of our board for many years. What are your thoughts about the PAUSD 2-meeting rule in non-emergency situations? And how do you plan to preserve this culture of openness? Ms. Ashland, this question starts with you.
My favorite question, thanks. Non-emergency situations, the 2-meeting rule is there for a reason, like I've already spoken about. The governance is complex, and a lot of people don't understand it. Those of us at this table generally do understand it, but there's the reason that we agendize and discuss something once and we vote on it at a subsequent meeting, and it's for transparency for the community. We've had huge transparency problems in the past few years, and there's nothing that infuriates the Palo Alto community more than closed-door conversations. So absolutely, that and the reason that those 5 board members, without violating the Brown Act, need to discuss that in public at our meetings. So there's no question that I would keep that.
I fully support the 2-meeting rule because, again, it is a method for transparency, for including the community in decisions, and most importantly, I think it provides an opportunity for the board members to really mull over issues after hearing opposite, or rather inapposite perspectives. I think that's the key because, and I'll just throw in a Voltaire quote that I really like, which is that no problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. And that's the key, because when the board has something on the agenda, and they hear passionate community members talking about that issue from all perspectives, and then they have other board members disagreeing with them, it gives them time, 2 weeks at least or more, to really cement those perspectives, to grapple with those issues. And that's what governance is all about. It's about grappling with the tough issues on a nuanced level. And so, giving that opportunity for the community to weigh in and then grappling with the community's perspective is really the key to the 2-meeting rule. For non-controversial issues, I think it's within the board's discretion to waive it for effective governance.
I Googled the 2-meeting rule to see what other city councils, school districts, and so forth in the state of California use it. There aren't any, as far as I can find. There's a condo association someplace I found that has a 2-meeting rule. And that's because the mechanism for transparency isn't doing everything twice. It is having an agenda that is published and is accessible to the public. The idea that we should do everything twice, I think really militates against our desire to have an effective school board that spends the right amount of time on things and that gets things done steadily for the public. Doing away with the 2-meeting rule doesn't mean that we wouldn't be able to talk about things as many times as we needed to. So it's not it doesn't say that we can only talk about things once. And if there's some issue of public importance, I suspect that we will talk about many things more than once and more than twice. But we don't need to bind ourselves to something that literally no other public body in the state of California does. And I would ask those candidates who support the two-meeting rule why we are so different that we need it when no one else does.
I think waiving the two-meeting rule in appropriate situations where there needs to be an expedition for timely reasons, like recently we needed a deadline to be met for a grant. And I think that is an appropriate place for it. But for most things that have community comment, I think it's very hard to make an informed decision, kind of like what was previously stated, when there's a lot of different contrarian views within that limited amount of time. And I think not only is the 2-week period important to be able to think about it and review, I think that there should be public meetings, like a coffee or something that, board members can go to, and community members who might not have been able to attend a school board meeting can talk to them and give their views, and a more in-depth point of view than the 3 minutes at the board.
I think that we need to take a look at actual board meetings and see what happens. The two-meeting rule doesn't sound like very much. Why waste time? But what it really means is, has the public had a chance to really look at the issues, and has the board weighed in on its responsibility to listen to the public and find the best way to spend the public's money? This is what is not being done. At one of the meetings where I saw $2.5 million being spent as fast as they could spend it, the two-meeting rule was used to prevent good questions like, why are we going to spend $1 million to get a deputy superintendent without going through a national competitive process? That's $1 million over 3 years. This is what's happening with this board. They have been so invested with their position that they no longer see themselves as a servant of all of you.
Thank you. The two-meeting rule is a mechanism for transparency, for sharing information, allowing the community the opportunity to participate in their public school district. Let's not forget it is a public entity which is supported by our public tax dollars. Those are our hard-earned tax dollars. And those are our children, at least for some of us, they're our children in those schools. I think we should honor that. I think that's more important than efficiency that we're talking about. I think in many cases that the community is not preventing the school board from having efficiency. And I think that some of our board members, I think, seem to have forgotten that it's a public entity and that it should honor the public interest. Thank you.
Next question is, please discuss the achievement gap and how PAUSD is doing. If you're elected as a school board member, what would your plan be to reduce this gap? Mr. Darb, this question is for you first.
So the achievement gap grows in a great way until 3rd grade, and then it's very, very difficult to bridge that gap all the way to graduation. So it is important for us to continue what we've been doing to a greater scale in terms of after-the-fact resourcing, expanding our partnerships with tutoring programs to provide tutors to students, to make sure that we are increasing the number of family engagement specialists, to make sure that we're targeting needs towards individual students and families. And of course, all of this is predicated on examining data at a site level and having a lot of communication with site leaders to make sure that they are examining the data and reviewing it to find where those gaps are. Now again, I said it before, but transitional kindergarten is really the key to bridging that gap or stemming that gap in the first place, because everything else is a band-aid for something that starts before kindergarten. And so expanding transitional kindergarten to every elementary school site, public, free transitional kindergarten, is really the key. And one concrete step I'd like us to take towards bridging the achievement gap, towards renewing our focus on equity.
The key to closing the achievement gap, in my mind, is actually the same key as for doing a lot of things that are critically important in the district, which is to have accountability and to devote resources. And so I'm not going to tell you what my favorite strategy is for closing the achievement gap, because I'm not an educator, and you don't want me, or I think any other school board member, to be making educational decisions about where to make that investment. But what I think we do need is to be clear about who's responsible, and I think site leaders need to be responsible. We need to be clear about how we're measuring that. The LCAP dashboard and the standard tests that let us compare ourselves not only to ourselves in the past but to other districts are critically important. And then making sure that we provide the resources that those site leaders need is also critically important. And then at the end of the day, holding our senior leadership and site principals accountable for getting the job done, so that we can make it clear that this is a really critical job for the district.
I have something on what Ken said that I kind of agree and disagree with. That I don't think that we know the best education system. That's what the teachers are for. But some of the things that they've already created need to be expanded and haven't been. And I think that is something that we can do because they've already created it. We just need to push it farther. Like the Connections program here, which is a great service that helps a lot of kids. But there's lots of kids who aren't being helped that need it. And so I think this is something that the board can look at what we're already doing and expand that to more people who need it. And so I think access to materials and services is very important. And I think kind of what we talked about earlier, lane bridging, that once someone is in a lower lane, it is very, very hard to try and help them to achieve a higher standard. And so I think lane bridging and giving people support in that sense to raise them up to a standard that we want.
The achievement gap is very large, very significant, and yes, we do know what to do about it, and we must do something about it. In research, and there are many different types of projects that have been targeted at achievement gaps in other schools, in other countries. But one that works that's across the street is the Program for Gifted Youth at Stanford, which was taken into districts like New York with schools that would dream of having an environment like ours. And it proved that in these worst districts, you can get kids with limited education, immigrant kids that are first year in the United States up to grade level. And these are the solutions that the board has to obligate itself to deliver to parents, students, teachers. We can do this very easily.
Thank you. About the achievement gap, a quote I like to share is that California's lag in academic achievement arises before children even enter the schoolhouse door. Entering kindergarten with deficits implies to us that early identification and early intervention is key, and also providing supports and monitoring all along the way would be very, very important. But I'd have to say that I think talking about the achievement gap is a bit of a misnomer to me. I would suggest that what we'd really like to talk about is that we want our students to be proficient, to meet state standards, and to graduate meeting our A through G requirements so that they may choose to apply to a CSU or a UC. I think we need to support all of our students along the academic spectrum to bring them to proficiency and let those who are excelling progress. It's not about necessarily closing the gap, but bringing everyone up to proficiency. Thank you.
It's not a question of does the board know the pedagogical answers to something this. The teachers know what they need and have been telling the district and the board in no uncertain terms very clearly that they need more support for this, that our AVID program is underfunded, that our students of color are disproportionately identified as special ed when that's not the case. The teachers are speaking loudly and clearly. Our job as the board is to listen and not a question of being punitive and punish a principal by holding a principal accountable when that school doesn't meet grade level at the right level. That means we as the board aren't allocating the resources so that principal and those teachers can do that job. We know the answer, we're just not listening.
The next question is, as a candidate, what would you do, what do you plan to do about the lack of accessibility to individual education plans and how little accommodation students get even with individual education plans? Mr. Dauber, this question that starts with you.
So the board, with my support, asked for a plan to improve special education this spring, funded it to the tune of $1.5 million, probably another over $1 million coming next year. We also looked at where exactly there are gaps. So, for example, the overall satisfaction of parents with children in special education is comparable to the entire parent community. There are some real deficits, however. So, for example, follow-up on IEPs, getting parents IEP status when they get report cards, which is required by the IDEA, is only 50% of parents report that they actually get those reports. So there's definitely some areas where we need to improve, both in the services that we're providing and also in these communication issues.
I think funding is a good first step, but I think one of the most important things is to educate the teachers on what they're required to provide regarding an IEP, where lots of teachers try and remove parts of the IEP, and after the student has achieved decent grades. And I think this is not going to be helpful because they got to that point of having decent grades and succeeding because of these accommodations. And that, along with that, teachers need to learn social emotional skills as well, because if they have empathy and if they can understand what someone with an IEP is going through, they would be more willing to work with them closely and to provide services that the students would need. So I think social emotional learning is important for teachers as well.
This is just just wrong information, and we've got to stand up and point out that the existing special education system does not support so many parents and so many students. We are, and I've been a parent at Barron Park, at Addison, at Terman, at Jordan. And my daughter is currently going through this system. And I've observed so many cases where parents and students are so neglected that I would say that this board is at the starting point of implementing it, and they've taken a very false step. They've basically started spending a lot of money on outside resources instead of growing its own internal capability to deal with perhaps the biggest problem we have.
Thank you. In a Palo Alto Weekly article, it cited the Director of Special Education as the reason for the request for the additional funds that we've heard cited was because the school district's special education need program was not in compliance with the law, and also to reduce litigation with families. So there is a lack of compliance with the district, and particularly in terms of our special education families. All we need to do is look at the outcome. Only 24.6% of our special students with disabilities are graduating meeting A through G requirements. The CASP scores in elementary school for students with disabilities are dismal. So in summary, the results are there, and obviously steps need to be taken. Thank you.
One of the reasons that we're out of compliance the primary reason has to do with funding, federal funding, state funding, as well as local funding. The teachers want to be in compliance. I've worked alongside the teachers and the administrators, and I would say, why aren't you giving me my quarterly IEP goal reports for my son? and the speech therapist would say, I'm a speech therapist, that's what I got my degree in, I'm supposed to be a case manager, I've received no training on how to be that case manager. So the problem we have has to come back to funding. The data will tell us that we're failing. We have that data. We need to work with the parents and the teachers and the students and the young people that are running for this board to say, where did we fail you? The data is proving that. We need to step forward, and it is the difficulty of being compliant following the law is that education law is highly subjective and individual. What is appropriate for this child at this date at this time is not a black and white answer.
So there are two steps here. First is to listen to our special education advocates in the community who've dedicated decades to this very issue. And we've done that so far. We've put money towards, a great deal of funding towards redesigning special education because of the advice of our advocates. But the second step is the most important step, which is to be a government, right? To make sure that we are putting processes in place to serve the underserved so that families don't have to rely on community advocates, so that we as the governing body of the school district have a structure in place that families can utilize. What we should be doing is we should be following the steps of a number of different districts in California to have an Office of the Ombuds, an independent ombudsman who would report directly to the board, not through the district's management structure, and would be there as a guide for parents and families through the very, very frustrating process of making sure IEPs are consistently followed and making sure IEP compliance is consistent. And so that's the idea for ensuring that.
This next question is a question about discrimination. The board has updated existing policies or created new policies that require adherence to the law regarding a district culture that is free of discrimination and harassment and inclusive to all students. Can you give any specific examples of your experience with implementation of such policies or best practices? Pervasiveness of discrimination takes a huge toll on many students. What can the board do to address this institutional discrimination? This question starts with Mr. Scharf. Okay, I can repeat that. The board has updated existing policies or created new policies that require adherence to the law regarding a district culture that is free of discrimination and harassment and inclusive to all students. Can you give any specific examples of your experience with implementation of such policies or best practices? Pervasiveness of discrimination takes a huge toll on many students. What can the board do to address this institutional discrimination? Mr. Scharf.
So I have not experienced the implementation of a lot of these things. I have experienced the causes of the implementations of these things. And I think that these are very important things, that when there's a problem between students and there's discrimination or bullying or something like that, that it is the district's job and the teacher's job and the school's job to make sure that the adults there who know better can be responsible and step in and take control of these situations. And that I know that this is happening more now because it's required, but previously I was told by the principal or vice principal that when someone was bullying me, I just needed to go talk it out with him. And so I think we're taking some steps forward, but I think we need to look at more things and how effective these steps are. And that mediation with teachers is very important, that we can't just have student-to-student resolution.
Should we wait for Inspector? Okay. So, discrimination is part of, it's really an outcropping of a system that starts and does not create empathy at the earliest stages. We can begin to change this, but it's going to require a massive commitment, a real change in thinking that involves every single person on this campus. Discrimination against special ed kids Let's not forget Albert Einstein is a special ed kid. Discrimination against new immigrants that are pouring into the system every single year, thank goodness. We welcome them all. Discrimination against people who do not have legal status in this country. We really need to focus on a wellness program, not $1 million that we throw at a problem thinking it's going to solve this, and start teaching kids from the earliest age about how to work together.
Thank you. Regarding institutional discrimination, the COSA report reporting on the October 2016 sexual assault incident stated that the district has a cultural and systemic problem. The OCR letter of findings, summarizing a 4-year investigation of our district, stated the same, that the district has a cultural and systemic problem. The COSA report reported that there's a practice and policy within our district of not documenting complaints. And those are not just sexual assault complaints. Those are discriminatory, harassment, intimidation, or bullying complaints. We, community members, asked the school board to do something about this. And one of the school board members asked our district staff to produce a directive that all staff must comply with documenting complaints, which are required by law. The district has refused, or at this point in time, has not produced a directive of that type, never provided that to us. So as a school board member, I would make sure that that directive went out. Thank you.
A step we've taken in the right direction is that the board voted to approve a Community Relations Committee. It was formed after the outcry of the school renaming process. So the school renaming process did proceed according to the plan that the board had laid out, and the result was not good. So we have a huge chance to get it right this time, and that is one concrete thing, the most concrete thing that the adults are going to do in this conversation about discrimination. The least amount of discrimination you will see is at the schools. The student-to-student interactions, even at the high school level, the Social Justice Pathway Program and the journalism students at Pali have a huge opportunity. They are moving far, far beyond the discriminations that the adults are still holding close in our hearts. So it is our problem to solve, and we need to do outreach to these communities that are feeling this discrimination and not sit back at our dais and assume that we have the right answers.
So I think the first part of the question was, what has your experience been with implementing things to remedy discrimination? So I'll just say, in the context as an example of employment discrimination, after the litigation, after the lawsuit is over, there's a period where the company who's been sued has to put changes into place. And these are changes that, they're wide-ranging, but changes that I've seen through my course of work. Now, at different debates, I've heard the sentiment that you can't see diversity, or diversity isn't skin deep. And I get that, but I think that speaks to a deeper misunderstanding and really a deeper need to have representation of people of color in places of leadership in the district. Because, and frankly, as the only person of color up here right now, I know personally how important it is. And so, making sure that we have more historically underrepresented teachers and staff, making sure that we have unconscious bias training, not just when teachers and staff join the district, but continuously, is going to be really important to making sure that we're addressing discrimination head-on from its very inception.
So the district has made huge strides in this area. When Kathy quotes the Cozen O'Connor report and uses the present tense, that's 2 years ago, and I think Kathy's well aware of that, and I get the politics of not acknowledging progress. But since then, we have a new superintendent. We have a new senior administrator in charge of compliance. We have a new Title IX compliance officer. We have an investigator. We have training. We have directives. If the only change that is actually needed here is to send another direction, then I think you should ask yourself, what is the force of the charge that somehow the district is lacking compliance in this area, and that it's critical that the school board do something different. The fact is, the school board has taken on this issue. I have been dealing with this issue since before I was on the school board. The only candidate, I think, up here who stood before the school board before I was even elected and advocated on this, and have devoted an enormous amount of energy, as have other colleagues on the school board. So I think it's important to acknowledge reality and not try to build a case based on a problem that is being solved and that has largely been addressed with enormous devotion of time and resources. I also want to send a message to our students that you have a process that is working that you can use, and I don't think it's appropriate to send a message that's different than that, because that's not accurate either.
This question is about smartphone addiction. In regards to the high growing rate of teen anxiety, much research is emerging from many areas of disciplines that smartphone use, including the use of social media, is a central culprit. There doesn't seem to be much recognition or action on this. Given our highly anxious students and a significant investment in mental wellness support, do you support action on this? Why or why not? We're starting with Mr. Boyd.
I think there's so much potential in new technology, like the iPhone, to teach languages. If you want to learn a language, there's no better place than to use Yabla or many language programs that run on the iPhone. The same is true with all of our detailed scientific curriculum. You know, you use interactive media, and you have an efficiency of learning that is probably 300% over a teacher standing in place. So I think we have to react to this without fear and realize that any kind of obsessive behavior, whether it's vaping or iPhone use or excessive sports, has the same negative downfall. But we do have to work with students so that they can realize what obsessive compulsive behavior with an iPhone is and take steps to limit it. But at this point, if you want to learn a language, get an iPhone and you'll be speaking in less than 6 months.
Thank you. Certainly there's education that can be shared, data and results of studies that can be shared about the effects of social media usage and devices, and those should be shared. But as Christopher said, there are also many, many benefits, obviously, of smartphones and social media. And this is something that is, again, in the realm of private citizens. So while education can be shared, I think it's personal choice, of course, for students as well as for parents.
The anxiety and smartphone addiction and social media, it's not accidental. Your smartphones, the games, even Facebook were intentionally designed with addiction as the primary goal. The PTSA, the parent PTA organizations at the high school level and at the middle school level have brought parent ed topics on this subject in front of our community. And I do think that the district, as we are looking at teaching more technology, teaching more computer science classes in our schools, that we do need to look at this emerging field, it's actually not that new, of teaching ethics along with technology. Is the technology being used for harm or for good? So it is something that I think we need to look at as an emerging area of pedagogy.
Stacy, I know you're a user researcher. Maybe you had a hand in designing the addiction. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I think Stacy's right. I think responsible technology use is the key here, because technology is not going away. And making sure that we are teaching our students in our schools how to be responsible about technology use, how to be responsible about social media, teaching them that your values don't disappear when you hide behind a screen. They have access, whether it's at school or at home, to a world of information, literally. And making sure that they can safely navigate that world is in the sphere of our education system now. It wasn't 10 years ago, it wasn't 20 years ago, but that's because the world was very different then. And that's a responsibility for us to take on. How we do that is, of course, left to the experts. I can't tell you what the best way to do it is. Nobody here can. But again, making sure that that is a priority on the board level so that we are listening to the advice of experts, looking at how other districts have done it, and seeing how we can make sure our students are going to be safe and responsible in using technology going forward.
Clearly helping students use technology responsibly is an important job for the district to do, just like enabling them to be responsible in lots of other areas of their lives. I think the hard problem is, what do we do about devices in the classroom, and what do we do about the distraction effect and so forth? And there, I don't think this is about abstract principles of, sort of private choice or, I think it's about does this impede or does it help the educational process? And so I think we need to look to teachers to give us the information about that and how they would like to see devices used. I think it's probably going to be more nuanced than we can imagine, because I think that those devices are being used in our classrooms, but I think they're also causing distractions. So I think we should not go to this conversation with sort of our own judgments about it, but I think we should listen to teachers and follow their guidance about what's the right response.
Big surprise. I agree with what a lot of people said, that education on technology is important, especially going forward. But I think, like what Ken said, is that evaluating the distractions, and there's lots of things that can be distractions. I think phones are just the newest thing to be a distraction. And I think there are ways that we have limited distractions in the past and ways we can limit these. And so, deciding how we incorporate phones and technology into lessons, and, there is technology out there that can block signals, and I don't know how expensive that would be to implement and whether it could be turned on and off during class time periods. But I think there are things to look at that can counter the distraction and disable it.
Thank you. The next question is about vaping. According to the Pali Voice, there have been numerous fire alarms set off due to vaping in the bathroom. The Voice reported that the Pali administration chose to lock Pali bathrooms in response to this problem. District employees were quoted saying that bathrooms without security cameras were locked. Doesn't this inconvenience all students who might need to use the bathroom? And what about the lost instruction time due to the fire alarm? How would you solve this problem? This question starts with Ms. Jordan.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I read the Pali Voice article, and there were two of them actually. And they quoted district employees saying that bathrooms were closed that didn't have security cameras, locked, I'm sorry. And also the Pali principal was quoted as saying that fire alarms were set off by vaping in the bathrooms. And so again, we're having our students going to the football field during a fire alarm rather than spending time gaining instruction in the classroom. This is not a new problem. It's a problem that was documented in several student publication articles a year ago. So why has our administration and our board not taken a more proactive role in trying to solve this problem? Also, our school district is comprised of public buildings. Vaping is considered smoking. Smoking is not permitted in public buildings. So again, our school district is not in compliance with the law. So as a school board member, I would like to see, or I would act, to try to have our district adhere to the law and work to monitor the bathrooms. Thank you.
As Kathy said, smoking in the bathroom is an age-old problem. I was at a public high school, inner city Chicago. There were no doors on the bathrooms. They had these 90-degree hallway entrances because the theory was the smoke would waft out and the teachers would catch the smokers, and they never did. The girls I saw could flush those cigarettes and run right out. So it's not about vaping, it's an age-old problem, and as we've discussed with data-driven, this is one of these things I would look at what's worked in other high school districts in the past and what can we do here, because it is definitely not new.
Locking the bathroom doors seems ridiculous to me. I mean, what's more important, that we are forcing our students to walk 100 feet farther to smoke, or that we're actually teaching them why it's bad? And so, to the latter point, education is the key here, because a lot of students don't actually treat Juuls or vapes as cigarettes. They don't get the connection, because they're different. Juuls, you can charge them on your laptop. They're cool. There are advertisements for them. They're advertised to kids like cigarettes were. So education is the key, teaching students that these are basically cigarettes, nicotine is addictive, and then teaching parents how to have those conversations with our students. The same thing that we were doing 30 years ago, 20 years ago, we have to do now in the context of technology, in the context of vaping. And again, that's a discussion that is best left to the experts. Let's see how the experts are having those conversations. Let's bring in experts to have those conversations with our students and with our parents.
I don't know all of the steps that the Pally administration and Good administration are taking with respect to this. I can tell you that it's completely false to say that the district isn't in compliance with the law. An easy charge to make, and again, I think it's simply not true. The reason that we're talking about this is because the district is being proactive and the school is being proactive in trying to address this problem. So we can't have it both ways. We can't complain about the efforts that the administration is doing and also claim that the administration isn't doing anything. Is it effective? I think that if you asked the staff, they would say that they don't yet have a handle on the vaping problem. I do want to correct one point here, which is that what I have heard directly from the superintendent is that it's not the vaping that is setting off the fire alarms. It's actual deliberate holding of hot objects like lighters up to fire alarms that's causing this problem. So this isn't sort of a incidental byproduct of vaping. It's a deliberate consequence of students who are doing what students have long done, but it's still obviously a problem, which is setting off fire alarms.
From my understanding, I think the locking of the bathrooms would have the bathrooms that aren't staffed locked. And I think that this is what I would consider a bad solution to a worse problem, where, yes, having the bathrooms locked kind of sucks, but going out to the field for a fire alarm is probably worse. So, you kind of look at that, it's like a bandage. It's not great, but it will probably hold over better to the point where you can find an actual solution for the long term. And I think education is important, and I think that there are some laws, I think, nationally that are trying to remove all the fruity flavors from vaping. And so I think these are things that we can try and encourage, that we can try and advocate for, that we can support national and state requirements for this, and that if those pass, it would be a lot easier to manage if the students aren't being targeted with nice flavors.
I think what this shows is that we have not been effective in teaching the students respect. We've not been effective in setting out a basic discussion of values and how certain disruptive behavior affects everybody. And I urge us to learn something from Chinese culture. I was raised inside a Chinese family, and I'm also Hispanic. My mother is Chilean, and I'm an immigrant to this country as well. But what we can learn from the Chinese is when they say everyone, 大家, they have a beautiful interpretation. If you look at the characters, it's the sign for big and the sign for family. And this brings us to a realization that we are so behind in building a system here of wellness, social, emotional learning, respect for each other, and that this has to begin at the earliest age in the transformational kindergartens.
That response dovetails perfectly into our next question, which is about social emotional learning. My son at Gunn and his friends have had a negative experience with self, which for the audience's reference stands for Social Emotional Learning Fundamentals. Yet I'm hearing some of the board candidates saying it is going very well. How do you measure the success of self? Ms. Ashland, this starts with you.
The SEL teachers at the district, at both high schools and at the district office, have spoken and presented on their data to the board. And the board has, at least one of the board members did say that that wasn't good enough, that data wasn't good enough. I think it is really critical that we incorporate student voice in this process, because these are the teenagers that are currently being used as a pilot to see if we can make progress on their social, emotional health and well-being. The fact that there's a huge backlash in the students doesn't mean we need to get away with the program. It does mean that we involve them in the evolution of the program, and I would encourage us to do that.
The students who find self most effective are the ones who are the first to say so. So they're sort of the bellwether for how effective it's going to be. certainly is not a perfect program, and no new program is. We have growing pains when we implement new programs all the time. And that just means that we have to hold steady, we have to evaluate what isn't working so that we can make it work. And that is going to require more than surveys to students, but it's going to require forums to engage students, to make sure that we are hearing from all students, to figure out where exactly the breakdown is happening. And I will say finally that a lot of this has to do with the support we give our teachers in teaching self, because early on especially, many teachers said that they didn't get enough support to actually properly teach the curriculum, and that results in, putting on a video and calling it a day, when we could do much more to make sure they are adequately trained on the program so the students are getting the most out of it.
We need to be committed to continuous improvement of this program, like other programs. I think it's true that any new program is going to require attention to implementation. I'd like to call attention to the distance that we've come. 7 years ago, I spent many hours, as did other community members, advocating to the school board for any program at Gunn that put teachers in contact with students in an advisory role. There was tremendous pushback from folks at Gunn, from the senior administration, enough pushback so that the school board, which actually agreed with us, wasn't able to get it done. So the fact that we're seeing this change at Gunn is tremendously important and impactful for students, because it brings them the opportunity for a relationship with teachers in a mentoring and advisory role that students at Pali have had in the teacher advisory program literally for decades. So yes, there are implementation issues. Yes, those need to be subject to a continuous improvement goal, just like everything else. But we definitely do not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We really need to acknowledge the great progress that has been made.
I think whether or not the program is doing well isn't as necessarily as important as the fact that we are starting to create these programs, and that this is let's call it the beta. It is not well-rounded, it has its bugs, it has its problems, but we need to test it to figure out what the problems are and how to fix them. And that we can't create a finished product without having a bumpy road to get there. And that we can fix it as we go along. And that the other comment I have on this is that I think teaching to high schoolers is a bit of a band-aid. I think that we should be teaching at elementary school, and that the kids should be learning it young, but because we haven't implemented it previously, we need some program to support the kids that miss that opportunity in elementary school. So the high school program would not be around for that long.
I think the feedback is hugely important. I think that we can't expect a single program to fit 12,000 students and 6,000 parents or less parents. But there are numerous families, numerous values, and I think we have to build a system that is highly respectful of the parents' values within the family. And so this argues for several different programs coexisting together. I might favor a Confucian one, since those are closest to my values. Other parents may favor self. So we have to be prepared to have several different programs. Certain parents love Project Cornerstone, and so on. So this dialogue has just begun, but I'll point you to Stanford again, favorite place for ideas. They have a program for wellness that is revolutionary, and it's built around flexibility, where you incentivize, in our case, students to take different kinds of small courses, small activities. It's called the Be Well program, and they earn berries. And, I think we can teach wellness through a system like this.
Thank you. It is good to live in reality, so let's talk about that. And let's also talk about involving student voice. We also hear discussion about that. So the feedback that I've heard from students about self is that unfortunately the curriculum at the moment is not fully formed. And that student feedback has been that they're concerned about the productiveness of the time currently, since the curriculum is not fully formed yet. So unfortunately, I think in this case, the district has chosen to roll out a program before it was really ready, It doesn't necessarily mean it couldn't be valuable in the future, but the feedback in living in reality is that currently, apparently the curriculum is not quite there yet. Thank you.
Due to time restraints, the next question will be our final audience asked question. We apologize if you're unable to get to your question, but I'd like to let you know that after closing statements, candidates will stick around to answer any questions that you may have one-on-one.
We could stay longer. We love being here. Thank you for having us.
Okay, the final question is about sex education. Comprehensive, medically accurate self-education is mandated by the Healthy Youth Act. How do you think this inclusive sex education benefits children and families in our community? Mr. Darb?
So we have an hour for this question, or what's the time limit on this?
1 minute as well.
Okay. I mean, comprehensive inclusive sex education is the key to building healthy attitudes towards sex and self. It's as simple as that. All of the problems we have around sex tend to stem from a lack of comprehensive education. We talk a lot about Title IX issues and compliance, but the underlying issue is really the attitudes we have towards sex. And addressing those is completely in the purview of comprehensive sex education. So that's sort of the short answer. I mean, the longer answer is obviously we have to comply with the law, and when the law mandates something, we have to carry it out. Additionally, there are great things with regards to consent education and power dynamics education that come from our comprehensive sex ed. I sat down with the head of the Health Connected and talked about the history of, the sex ed program. And it's a huge program. It's run in, I think, 90 districts around the state. It's a great program. We are absolutely lucky to have this program in our schools.
I don't think anybody disagrees with the value of sex education in our schools. I think, the devil is in the details here. And I think there is a diversity of opinion within the community about the way that sex education intersects with what's going on in the rest of students' lives, what families are teaching, and so forth. I think it's a very productive conversation to have in the community about which of the various curricula that are state approved and state that meet the legal standards we should be using, and I think we should be eager to have that conversation. Obviously, the bottom line is that we need to have a compliant sex education curriculum, and so the question is which of them should we choose, not whether we should have one or whether a particular one is perfect, because they aren't. But I do think that it's a valuable conversation for us to have, and I look forward to having it on the school board.
My view of it is kind of, they're going to learn it either way, whether you teach them or not. And so you want to make sure that they get the best information that they can, and so that they are safe and that they understand what all the consequences are to their different actions, and that the parents of these children understand that, they might have different values or different ideas on how to raise a child, and that's okay, but that we need to educate them on how to be responsible parents. That, we teach our kids that if you're going to drink because it's legal, you need to understand that you can't just drink forever because you're going to die. And so I think the importance of these topics needed to be discussed with the parents to bring them on the same page to agree to these educational programs.
I don't think that parents need sex education. I must disagree with that point. What I think that this school board and a lot of our government need to hear is that parents have values, and you must respect our values. And right now, we do not believe that the values in many of the sex education videos and classes respect girls as human beings. They are not given the right sort of understanding. Children are not given the right sort of understanding. Students are not given the right sort of understanding as to the magnitude of what a relationship means. And It's not that anyone wants to control education, but one wants to de-stress the life of an American adolescent that is forced into too many things without good judgment. And who can give you better judgment than the parents that love their children?
Thank you. So it is the law, the California Healthy Youth Act, and comprehensive sexual education is extremely valuable for a district, for our students, and for our community. Particularly also when coupled with the opt-out provision for families who may want to make use of that and can make use of that at a very granular level. One lesson can be opted out even to that level. So I think that it's very beneficial to provide it while giving families that opportunity as well to feel comfortable with the curriculum that's being offered to their student. Thank you.
Like everybody else here, I support the sex ed curriculum at the high school level as well as at the middle school level. And it is an age-old problem. So now we've got sex, now we've got drugs. If we could get rock and roll, that'd be really cool. The districts, the parents in this community that have been protesting against the middle school curriculum are fueled by the fact that there are districts in the Bay Area that have gone out of compliance. So this is a case where we all care and want our kids to be happy and healthy and safe, and where we need to come together as a community so that we have parents supporting the sex ed curriculum on both sides of town. The RISE Committee for Sex Ed and Safe Environments on Pali does not have any current gun representation. We need to make sure that this is happening on both sides of town, and that the demographics of our community are changing. So we need to come together and focus on the fact that we want our kids to be healthy and safe, and not start from the fact that this curriculum is scary and different than what we learned back in our day.
Thank you. Candidates will have 90 seconds for their closing statement. Closing statements will go in reverse order, starting with Mr. Scharf. In this election, why should voters vote for you? Mr. Scharf, 90 seconds.
The school system's primary goal should be to prepare the youth to have the education and skills to function in society and the modern workplace. We need to make sure that we provide skills to all of the students and that we are teaching a broad range of skills, not necessarily just strict academics. It's important to teach skills valuable in society, such as social emotional skills to help communicate and interact with others in our life, the ability to problem solve, and technical skills to function as business, such as business contracts and formal professional writing. Skills learned in class should be applicable in real-world settings, not just theoretical knowledge. We want to give everyone the opportunity and access to higher education through universities and colleges, but also the ability to go and survive in society without a university degree if that is not their desired path. There are many options after high school and many paths to take, and the ultimate prize is not Harvard. It's making a living doing something you like, surrounded by the people you like doing it with, and being happy and successful. I am working towards providing these opportunities to all students and would appreciate your support.
Thank you to the PTA Council for hosting this event and to the audience for being here. Many of you have been here for several forums, and so that's a lot of commitment. Thank you. The Palo Alto Weekly called this our district in the best shape it has been in a decade. Said that this is the strongest school board in decades. The Daily Post said that I have put the district, and I think it gives me too much credit, honestly, the board has put the district firmly on the right path. And I think that those judgments are correct, and they reflect a tremendous amount of progress over the last 4 years. And I think the best argument for an incumbent is the record that they have achieved. And so I will stand on that record. I think when you're assessing candidates, you need to listen carefully, not just to whether they can point out problems, but whether those problems are actually in the past or are being addressed. So it's easy to say steps need to be taken. The question I think you need to ask is, are those steps actually being taken? Are we funding a program for special education to address compliance issues? Do we have an auditing of instructional minutes that makes our high schools in compliance, for example? If the answer to that is yes, then I think you need to look for other reasons to vote for a candidate, and I think you can support an incumbent. If the answer is no, then I think it's a legitimate question. Why not, and what should be different? Thank you.
I think it's important to revisit the role of the board to answer this question. You know, we have great PTAs and a fantastic, passionate parent community in this district. So what exactly does the board bring to the table other than that? And the role of those parents is to advocate for students, and that's probably more important than the role of the board itself. But the role of the board is to govern. And that means to take that advocacy, to balance that advocacy with collaboration, with execution, to implement concrete solutions that take into account things like compliance and fiscal management. Those are things I do every day for a living. It's what I've been trained to do. And the sort of rich and very circuitous path I've taken from the district has really informed how a student from the district can go on to great success. Not to toot my own horn, but I would consider myself a PAUSD success story. I fight for people's rights. My wife and I both grew up in the district, and we moved back here to have our kids here and to send our children to school here. Everything I've done with my life and the person that I am is because of PAUSD. And I have a debt to pay that forward. And because my wife and I are going to have kids in this district, I have a responsibility to all students and all future students in this district. It's because of PAUSD that when I see people in need and I have the ability to help, I have to step up. And so a lot of people ask me, well, how can you run for school board if you don't have kids yet? And with all this in the back of my mind, my answer is, how could I not?
Thank you to the PTA Council for hosting all of these forums and running them so smoothly, and to the students who've been moderating these forums. You guys are really incredible and valuable asset to our community. As for why to vote for me, luckily there's 2 seats open on the board. You could both vote for an incumbent and a new person. My main strength is that I work across all stakeholder groups, particularly with parents and with teachers. I'm frequently asked as I'm campaigning, why is our district so adversarial? Why are we so political? Why can't we just focus on educating our kids? That is what I want us to do. That is what I will work for. I want to aim higher than just compliance and actually dedicate these resources to the educators. We can keep hiring and hiring and hiring at the district office, but if we're not supporting at the site levels, then those students and families will continue to feel like they're being failed in the process. I have this track record of getting things done, building consensus across groups. So we need to focus on the fact that we all want our kids to be happy, healthy, wealthy, and wise. Don't forget wealthy. That is not a given for everybody. We need to encourage our students to grow and challenge themselves, to empower our families and community to feel connected to the decision-making process, and lastly, to embrace the rich diversity of our community that is one of kindness, empathy, and respect, so that all of our children will feel empowered to go on and make the world a better place.
Thank you again to PTAC for hosting this forum and for all of you for being here today. In closing, I'd like to say that we have a lot to be proud of in our district. We have great teachers, facilities, we have great community support. We, of course, have our great students. For some of us up here, these are our children in the school district, and we do have a heightened stake in providing them with an excellent education and an excellent experience in our schools. To do this, our public school district needs oversight. And yes, that has been lacking. $6 million here, $5 million there, cannot be invested in the same way in the education of our students. Parents had to raise objections to a high school schedule that was going to shortchange our students by 21 days of instruction. While we do have a great school district, it does need oversight. Change is needed on the school board to provide that oversight. And if I am elected, if I earned your vote, I would work to provide that oversight. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I think I'm here because I deeply respect other people, and I listen to them, and I'm a doer. I know the value of a dollar as an entrepreneur. And what's an entrepreneur? There's no a really good definition, but you kind of know one when you see one. is just obsessed with making things work with no money, and nothing's going to stop them. And I believe I can apply this philosophy to my job on the board. I have experience. I've been able to implement successfully, design, develop, and implement a visionary financial system for the workers' comp system in California. That's a $1.8 billion revenue that's coming through that system. I've participated in the Stanford Be Well program for a short time, and that happens to be the foremost wellness system, in my humble opinion. It's brilliant. It took 30 years of research and development by Dr. Farquhar, a brilliant leader, and Dr. Wes Ailes, and it's been implemented across the street. And it doesn't try to offer a single system for everybody. It offers 1,000 tiny little solutions that everybody will want at least a few of them, and gives them a prize. And it really has taken Stanford by wildfire, and I think that's needed here.
Thank you to the candidates, attendees, PTA Council, and site volunteers for attending this forum. To close, please join me in welcoming PTA President Jade Chow for some closing words.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jade, and it's my pleasure to thank all the candidates for participating in all 4 of our candidates forum, and also to thank you for being here. I just want to take a moment and let's give them a round of applause. It's been a lot of work. And I want to thank you guys for being here on a Saturday afternoon. I know you care deeply about our students, so do we. And it is the effort of many people in this community to put on these forums. Today, I'd just like to recognize some of the folks who have been behind the scenes, and also our wonderful students and moderator, Max. Thank you for being here. Anya, thank you for giving the 3, 2, 1 when time is running out. Thank you to Grace and Nirmala over there at the questions table. Would you like to stand up real quick? Also, our translators were here this afternoon to help translate, Jenny and Bernadette. And Nadia was walking around with your empty cards so we could grab your questions. I really want to encourage you guys, because you guys are here, to take this information that you've learned and spread it with your friends and over at the grocery store or wherever you might be, because you are really giving them great information, not only what the candidates have said, but also your personal experience and understanding. PTA Council is here to serve you. We are trying to do our best to bring information to you as soon as we have it, and we want you guys to be involved. So continue to read your e-news and all the information that's coming through your schools, as well as on our website.
Jade?
Yes?
We can ask a question here. At least I would ask the question. I've proposed that for the next election, we actually have a way through PTAC to reach the voting body so that all candidates can put up their information, their videos, answer questions with a blog online. And we would love to donate time to work to actually deliver that.
Well, thank you for saying that. Actually, this and every forum that we've had has been live streamed and recorded. I don't know if you guys know that. And I want to thank especially Kobe, who has been one of our videographers, and Samantha, and Ophir, who's our VP of Education. So we are trying to do just that. Thank you. Okay, in closing, I want to ask you guys for 2 things, which is very unconventional. Number 1, I'm going to ask all of the candidates to stand, and I want everybody who wants a group photo with them to come up to the front, and we will have that group photo taken. And the second thing I want to ask us to do is, before you guys leave, I'm going to ask the candidates to go to the door first, so they can each shake your hand as you're going out of this room. Okay? All right, so whoever's got the good camera, please volunteer it, and we'll have this group photo. Candidates, please stand.